It's a tale as old as time. Beauty and the yeast. Hello, my dears! Buttercup the baking spaniel is here with another delicious new recipe to share. Today is an exciting day because it is the very first time that I will be sharing a yeasted dough recipe on the show. For some reason, working with yeast has always been quite intimidating for me, but I've decided to conquer my fears and dive into more bread recipes this year. Today, we are going to make a cookie butter pull-apart bread. Oh my goodness, I just know you all are going to love this one. We better get started. Before we begin, let's talk a little bit about yeast. Yeast is a living microorganism, a type of fungus to be exact. The strain we use for baking acts as a leavening agent, which means it helps our baked goods rise. I could spend an entire episode talking about the science behind how yeast works. But to put it simply, when added to a dough, yeast will feed off of the sugars present, releasing carbon dioxide and alcohol. This causes the dough to rise and also gives bread a distinctive flavor. My gosh, is that so fascinating? The two most common forms of yeast used in baking are active dry yeast and instant yeast. In most recipes, these can be used interchangeably in a 1-to-1 ratio. Just keep in mind that active dry yeast will need a slightly longer rising time compared to instant yeast. I will be using instant yeast for this recipe. Our first step will be to proof the yeast. This will activate the yeast so that it can start working quicker and will also confirm that your yeast is still alive so that it can work properly in your dough. In a small saucepan, measure out 240 milliliters of whole milk. We are going to very gently warm this up over a low heat to between 110 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 43 to 46 degrees Celsius. Be careful not to let it go over this temperature or else you risk killing the yeast. When the milk reaches the desired temperature, we will pour it into a large mixing bowl. Add in 7 grams of active dry or instant yeast and 1/2 teaspoon of sugar. Stir gently to combine. Now we need to let this sit for 5 to 10 minutes. You should start to see bubbling and foaming. This means your yeast has been activated. If it does not have any reaction, then it means your yeast is no longer alive and will need to be replaced. Poor yeast! Now that our yeast is all bubbly, let's add in 480 grams of all-purpose flour, 48 grams of granulated sugar, 7 ounces of kosher salt, 85 grams of softened unsalted butter, 2 large eggs, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. I'm going to mix this using the paddle attachment on my stand mixer until it begins to form a dough. Once it starts coming together well, we can start kneading the dough. Yarr! All right, dough, I need you to become a delicious bread. Do you understand? Oh, silly me. Kneading is actually a technique used to build up the gluten structure in your bread. This can be done by hand or in the stand mixer using the dough hook attachment. Personally, I like to start in the stand mixer and then switch to kneading by hand to finish the process. Let's mix this on a medium speed for around 5 to 7 minutes. Now I'm going to turn the dough onto a lightly floured surface This bowl needs handles. And begin gently kneading the dough by hand for several minutes. When you are kneading dough, it is important to push it away from you and not press down too hard. Push away, fold back, then rotate and repeat. If your dough seems very sticky, you may need to add more flour. I'm quite a newbie bread maker myself, so my technique probably isn't perfect either. Kneading dough can be so relaxing and fun though. When your dough is finished, it should have a smooth and slightly elastic feel and be able to hold its shape when rounded into a ball. Let's transfer this dough to a large bowl that has been oiled lightly. Plop. Now we need to let this dough rise until it is approximately double in size. This first rise is called bulk fermentation. The amount of time needed is going to vary depending on whether you use active dry yeast or instant yeast, as well as the temperature of your house. Warmer environments will cause your dough to rise faster, while colder environments will cause it to rise slower. In general, it should take about 30 to 60 minutes for instant yeast and up to 2 hours if you are using active dry yeast. While we are waiting, let's work on making the filling for our bread. You will need 200 grams of cookie butter. I'm using Biscoff brand, but is also sometimes called Speculoos cookie butter. Add in 1½ teaspoons of cinnamon, 13 grams of sugar, and 28 grams of melted butter. Stir together well. Now some of you may remember that I absolutely love Biscoff cookie butter. I even made an incredible cookie recipe featuring them a while back. Yum, yum! Well, our dough certainly has risen to the occasion. Let's place it on a lightly floured surface. To make it easier to work with, we are going to split this in two. Set one of the halves aside for now. We will roll out the first half into a large rectangle. I rolled mine out to about 16 inches. Now we need to cut 2 strips off of one end, approximately 2 inches in width each. Let's take about half of the cookie butter filling and spread it out evenly onto the rest of the dough. That's looking so yummy. Once that is nice and even, we will cut the rest of the dough into strips approximately the same size as the first 2 strips. Now for the tricky part. We need to stack the strips with filling on them on top of each other, forming 2 separate piles. Once complete, we'll take the remaining strips without filling and place one on top of each stack. These stacks will be cut again into approximately 2-inch squares. Take each square and place it into a muffin tin that has been sprayed with cooking spray. Then this whole process will need to be completed again with the second half of the dough. Okay, it's time for the dough to prove itself. Does it have what it takes to become the very best bread? Just kidding. Proving refers to the final rise before the bread is ready to go in the oven. Much like the bulk fermentation, this step will vary depending on the surrounding temperature, but should take around 30 to 60 minutes at room temperature. If you're making these ahead of time, you can also place these in the refrigerator for up to 16 hours to slow the rising process. Just make sure to let the dough come back to room temperature before you bake it. Once the dough has proved, we can bake these at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 175 degrees Celsius, for 18 to 22 minutes. They should have a lovely golden brown color to them. While our bread is baking, we need to make a sugar syrup glaze to pour over top. In a small saucepan, combine 50 grams of sugar, and 40 milliliters of water. Heat over a medium heat until the mixture comes to a simmer. Once simmering, cook and stir for about 3 minutes, or until the mixture thickens just slightly. While the bread is still warm, we will brush the tops with the sugar syrup. Now all that's left to do is to let them cool completely, and then it's time to enjoy. Goodness me, can you believe how lovely these turned out? The texture of the bread is delightfully soft and pillowy, and pulls apart in perfect little strips. The cookie butter flavor pairs so well, with a hint of cinnamon in there too. I also love how the size is so nice for sharing. Just truly a wonderful treat all around. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to let me know what you think of this recipe in the comments below. Oh, and if you missed the announcement in my last video, I have a new incredible design available now in my Redbubble shop. Designed by the artist O Pinfeathers, this vintage-inspired design features those all too familiar cheeseburger hand pies. Be sure to check out the link to my shop in the description below. Much love to all of you. Until next time, mwah! Beauty and the yeast. I hope you're ready for more. I'm on a roll.
Oh boy. Got any more? The yeast you could do.
I'm toast.